Hey, my name is Serge. I've always been fascinated with technology and always had like a interest in engineering. But I think the way that EVs are made and implemented today is very bad and inefficient, and I can explain why. So, what's kind of interesting is that the problem that the EVs try to solve is climate change and improving the environment. But really, those things have to do with more of the policy of the fossil fuels than the EVs. Everybody is always thinking that the EVs are green. There's like a little green leaf, and everyone's always telling you it's good for the environment. However, what the EVs do is they store energy in the form of chemical energy, and there's many different ways to store energy and use it later. There's like kinetics with flywheels and compressed gases. There's chemical energy in fuels. What's really crazy is that cars are actually solar powered because fuel was made using photosynthesis, half a billion years ago by plants. Originally, Earth was a rocky world that turned into an ocean world, and it had carbon gas in the environment. When the first life of the planet developed, one of the first things that were made is photosynthesis, and so life has been growing plants and packaging carbon into carbon fuels for half a billion years. So every car, every truck, every factory is mostly powered by those ancient fuels that were made by plants that were powered by the sun, because when photosynthesis makes carbon fuels, it takes energy from the electromagnetic radiation from the sun and uses it to bind and uses it to store energy in molecular bonds. So when the molecular bond is broken, the carbon fuels go back to CO2 and H2O. Now, some people might be thinking this is like defending cars or fossil fuels or whatever, but it's not. The problem with global warming is that we're taking too much of this historical supply of fuel, and we're spending hundreds of years just digging it out of the ground for very low cost and just burning it up very wastefully. How wastefully? Extremely wastefully. A gallon of gas contains if you burned a gallon of gas, you would get about 33 kilowatts of thermal energy, and a plug-in hybrid vehicle with a 10 kilowatt battery can go about 32 miles. If you use that battery to make heat, it would only make 10 kilowatts of heat. So the gallon of gas has almost 4 times the energy. Meanwhile, we're not getting 108 miles per gallon when we're using gasoline for engines. And 1/3 of the heat comes out the tailpipe, 1/3 of the heat comes out the radiator, and then the engine keeps constantly going from lean to rich to keep the catalytic converter burning so that there's no pollution. Further, most of the cars don't monitor the cylinders individually, so if the compression varies or if the fuel injector throughput varies, it's not going to have perfect combustion in terms of the air-fuel ratio. So no matter what, the engine is extremely inefficient. What the EVs do is they're a lot more efficient than that. But the EVs should not get the credit for being so efficient because they're as efficient as they should be. Meanwhile, it's the gas engines that are underperforming. I don't really understand what's so complicated about trying to get energy out of a gasoline or petrol engine, because all that it does is it generates heat and it generates pressure. and we have expanders that take work out of pressure that are like 92% efficient. So why can't we use it here? And so, in my opinion, I think it's actually a political policy, because it's just really easy to get fuel out of the ground and then just sell it to other people for huge sums of money, and it becomes another tax on the population. So in my opinion, I think both EVs and gasoline engines are terrible. I think that the solution is something different and something new. The issue with petrol and gasoline engines isn't that they are inherently evil or polluting or causing global warming. It's really our policy where we get the fuel from. And as long as we make our own fuel, for example, if you make like a continent-sized like corn farm, it becomes a chemical solar battery, and so you can just use ethanol to power your gas guzzlers, and then you don't have to worry about causing global warming, because as long as you're carbon neutral, you're not pulling carbon fuels from the ground, then you're not depositing carbon gas back into the air, and you're not causing climate change. So I think we should just raise taxes on non-renewable energy sources every year, like, maybe like 2.5% a year forever, until maybe like in 50 years the tax is like ridiculous, and people really have to stop using fossil fuels. There's a lot more room to get a lot more energy out of the fuels that we burn. When we're talking about these engines that are 28% efficient on a good day, they actually get a lot more inefficient with age. You give them 5-7 years, and the pistons start having different compressions, and the catalytic converter loses some mass, and everything gets dirty, and all the sensors aren't reading as well, and every time you start up the car, it's running rich, and you get like 10-15 miles per gallon instead of 108. What's personally frustrating to me about that is that these are all problems that have solutions. Just have an engine computer that will periodically vary the fuel input for the different cylinders, and then use the oxygen sensor to determine how rich or lean each of the cylinders are, so that the computer can memorize how much duty cycle to use for each cylinder to have perfectly balanced fuel economy. But to me, it kind of seems like it's almost like a conspiracy. I used to have a Chevy Cobalt, which was a Chevy compact sedan, and at the pump I would get 19 miles per gallon on this car that was barely 3,000 pounds, and it was an inline 4 2.2 cylinder engine, and I just didn't understand how my fuel economy was so bad in this tiny car. And then my next car was a Chevy Malibu sedan, and that one was 17 miles per gallon, even though it was the same weight, and it had a slightly bigger engine. It had a 2.4 Ecotec engine, and yeah, that car would get 17 miles to the gallon. And my next car after that was I think it was like second gen MDX. It was like a 6,000 pound V6 SUV with a 3.6 liter engine, and that one would get 17 miles per gallon at the pump too, but the car was twice as heavy and had like almost half more displacement, but somehow they were getting the same fuel economy. So I don't know, it's just something about the domestic American products, the domestic American cars. It just seems like they are running wastefully on purpose, because the fuel is so abundant and the fuel industry is so lucrative. So after that, I had a Prius, and the Priuses generally get like 44 miles per gallon or better. It's like 38 if you're blasting the AC too hard. But my Prius was really old, So I think I used to only get like 38 miles per gallon. But then what happened is that the Prius has like a giant hydraulic brake controller that talks to the battery and the inverter. And so this giant brake controller is vulnerable, and in my car it actually broke. And so the brakes would work just fine, but whenever you would step on the gas, it wouldn't charge the hybrid system anymore. So the hybrid system was solely run by the engine. And so the engine worked double time and it was always running. And then the battery started getting worn out because the car was so old. And as the battery started wearing out, the engine was running all the time, and the battery didn't have capacity. And so this car with no regeneration and constantly running engine, it would still get 27 miles per gallon at the pump. Which was crazy because this is without the hybrid system and with the car malfunctioning, and it's still getting like, half better fuel economy than the competitors. And that has to do with the Atkinson stroke engine design. Basically, the engine would have a different plan for the way it operated the valves. It would keep the valves open longer on the compression stroke and the opposite on the exhaust stroke or something like that. And so it would be a less powerful engine, but it would extract more energy from the fuel. And so there's other ways to do that too. There's a BMW car that has water injection. And so when you push the engine to the limits and you floor the car, it will start injecting water into the intake. And a lot of people get their own idea about this. They'll say something like, oh, it makes the air cold or something, but that actually has not. I've seen YouTube shorts that say that, and that is absolutely not true. If it was making the air cold, it would, the water droplets would have to phase change, so they would have to evaporate. But if the water would evaporate in the intake, it would actually cause the humidity to go up. And as the humidity goes up, it waters down the oxygen content of the air. So making the air more humid would make less power. So you wouldn't humidify the air if you're trying to make more power. And they're trying to rationalize it from the point of view of, oh, we're going to make more power by making the air cold. If you're trying to make the air cold, it's going to make the air humid, it's going to have less oxygen, it's going to make less power. So really what the BMW technology is actually doing is it's spraying water droplets into the engine, where the water droplets go into the cylinders where they are still droplets of water. They're not gas, they're liquid. And what happens is when the combustion hits like 3,000 degrees, the water will instantaneously vaporize, becoming steam. And that phase change consumes energy, and therefore the heat is going to drop while the pressure is going to go up, or stay the same. So it's basically, engines already do this. Whenever you floor the engine, it will add extra fuel, because when the extra fuel is subjected to the temperatures of the combustion with no air to burn it, it will just phase change into a gaseous form, which will take away energy. However, the latent heat that it absorbs is a lot less of what the water's is, because water's, it takes like a lot more energy to boil water than most other things. So the water actually absorbs way more heat than fuel. And also, that fuel that is used like that will just go into the catalytic converter, where it will be decomposed into water and CO2. But that fuel could have been used in a productive way to generate energy, instead of just maintaining the engine temps just to joyride. But you can just skip the whole water injection and just incorporate the water into fuel, and they actually already had this. They had like ethanol 50 or methanol 50, which is like 50% water, 50% alcohol. And so you can use a fuel like that because it's gonna be converting a lot of the heat into pressure, and so it's gonna convert way more of the fuel's energy into work. And so we do have all these alternative technologies that, we can use chemical solar panels to make free fuel, and then we can mix it with water to get way better fuel economy. But we're not doing any of that because, I don't know, I guess like political motivations, multinational corporations, like, I don't know, like, and every time I tell this to someone, everyone's like, oh, if it's so good, they would have invented it already. But it just seems like it's just under the wraps on purpose. The problem is that you can't really make free stuff. No one in power benefits if you have a free, maintenance-free, unlimited energy source. By the way, there's no such thing, but I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, if you give away free stuff, people in the top layers of society aren't going to benefit. Everything has to be sold. Everyone has to be giving their labor and their money to someone else so that, the people in control are always happy. So if you do make this car that gets 100 miles per gallon, which I think Volkswagen had a car like that. It was more like a motorcycle, but anyway. And also there's like these like diesel European cars that get like 60 miles per gallon, and they're not even hybrid. Imagine if you hybridize those. Anyway, you can't make free things because the billionaires and the corporations and the politicians, there's no way for them to embezzle money off of that, essentially. And so they need something that costs stuff, and that's why I think stuff like EVs and wind and solar, they're compatible with these power structures of billionaires and CEOs and stuff, because solar panels, you gotta like melt sand, and it's like very expensive to energy intensive to do that. And so every 10 years they try to like every 10-20 years they try and make you replace your solar panels because they like crack over time, or they just get like dirty beyond being able to wash them or something. And also, if some of the solar panel silicon breaks, it will actually cause the whole circuit to not work. So over time, your solar panel bank is going to lose capacity more and more and more. But also, I've seen these companies that install these solar panels. They're extremely they have extremely high markups. Like if you were to buy, a pallet of solar panels from China, where all of them are made, it's like $70 for a 700 watt solar panel, and so you pay basically $100 a kilowatt for the product. But when these companies are installing these solar panels for residents here in America, they're charging, $1,000 or $2,000 a kilowatt. And so, very often they're trying to use the government rebates and subsidies to bankroll their insane prices. And so this industry has a lot of waste and money, and there's a lot of opportunity to get money out of people. So it just seems like everything is used as a function to extract wealth from everywhere else, I guess, all the time. So I think it's the same way with like windmills. You know, they cost insane amounts, so hundreds of millions of dollars, and you gotta keep replacing the windmill blades. So they're not really making power any cheaper, because when you do get the power for free, they just find some way to make you pay for it. And also windmills are solar powered too, by the way, because the sun is like heating different parts of the planet, and the clouds are causing low pressure zones, and so it's like a lava lamp, and the differences in pressure of places causes the wind. So everything's on this planet is actually solar powered. The cars, the people, the windmills. So it's the same problem with the EVs as well. Basically, they're heavier, so they consume more tires. They're heavier, so they consume more energy, and so it costs a lot of money to. Their MSRPs are enormous. It costs a lot of money to build them. The manufacturers are making a killing on the markup, and the car manufacturers, they want you to get rid of your car. So they have lease programs to help you get rid of your car, and they have like planned obsolescence where they want you to get rid of your car. And it just so happens like every 8 to 10 years you gotta replace the battery on the EV. Now there's better technologies out there like lithium iron or salt or lithium titanium oxide or solid state batteries. But, just like your phone, they're probably not gonna switch that technology. Like phones are still using regular old lithium, and I don't think there is even a justification. But if I were to pretend and make one for them, I would say, they would probably be using lithium because it's got the highest score for the most capacity, but 800 cycles, and you charge your phone 800 times, you lose 20% of the charge. So you just end up 3, 4, 5 years, and your phone doesn't hold a charge anymore, and you're always charging it. And so they want it that way because they want you to keep buying a new phone, because they make money whenever you buy a new phone. And so with the cars, they already always wanted everyone to get rid of their old car. But now, after 10 years, the car becomes a huge financial liability and obsolete. And so these EV cars are going to be getting thrown out and recycled like crazy. So the waste suits the industry extremely well. And so, the EV stuff is going to be big with the car manufacturers, and they have like lithium titanium oxide technology, which has like 100 times more amperage. If you don't know what amperage means, it's like the horsepower of batteries basically. So they have these like 100 times horsepower batteries that last for 30,000 cycles before losing 20%. And so it's basically a lifetime battery. It's a battery that has the same, expiration speed as a human. And so they're selling them. They exist. They're out there, but no one's gonna use them. And no one's gonna use them because if something is too beneficial and is too much cost savings, it's just not interesting to anyone, any politicians or CEOs or anyone like that. So unfortunately, we have to deal with, money pit garbage for everything. And that's why I don't like EVs, because of all the waste I keep mentioning is, instead of doing all that, why don't we, and also another problem is like the energy infrastructure. We have 300 million or 200 million vehicles in America, and we consume a crazy 5 billion barrels of oil or something. Anyway, if you do the math on it, which I have, but it's been a while, but when I did the math on it, if we were to electrify every single vehicle in America, we would need 11 times more energy grid, and our energy grid costs $5 trillion. And so, you know, how would we get 11 times more energy grid, and probably for free? And it's just not happening because, you know, whenever we talk about like free school lunch, everyone's like, oh, how are you going to pay for it? Healthcare, oh, how are you going to pay for it? We are definitely not paying $55 trillion for energy grid to electrify all the vehicles. So it's just an impossible undertaking to create the energy infrastructure to electrify all the vehicles, or half or a quarter. And so basically, it's just a useless effort that we are engaging in with this EV stuff. So I think the most beneficial and efficient way to make a car that's environmentally friendly is to just make, you know, diesel engines that run on 50% ethanol and water, and you know, hybridize them with like lithium-ion battery packs, like small ones, like a kilowatt, not 10, not 60, you know, a tiny little thing. Maybe even just supercapacitors too. But anyway, and then if you do that, you basically have like cars that do 60, 70 miles per gallon, equivalent of gasoline, because, you know, if it's water, it doesn't have fuel. But anyway, that's not here or there. And then to solve the global warming itself, we just keep rising the prices on the fuel. You know, just all the oil, the gasoline, you know, all kinds of fuels, just keep adding a 2.5% tax every year. You know, people talk about Trump's tariffs a lot, and, you know, for them to work or not work, they have to kick in gradually, because no one's gonna adapt to a volatile market. And also business ideas and manufacturing things take time to develop. So, you know, you can't do a drastic thing immediately. Like, it would take time for benefits to kick in. So, you know, protectionist policy where you tax the imports and you discount domestic products would definitely help boost industry in your country. However, you can't make like groundbreaking change overnight. So essentially what you have to do is you have to very slowly enact change. Instead of doing 25% 1 year, you have to do 2.5% over 10 years. Because every year there's going to be room to adapt, improve, change, and, you know, do things to be able to work with the system. So like Trump tariffs should have been slow over time. Same thing with this fuel thing. We have to get people off of using, we have to stop people from using fossil fuels, because the fossil fuels, when burnt, they go up into the atmosphere where the carbon gas stays there. So we have to slowly wean all the cars and all the industry off of the fossil fuels. And the best way to do that is to just enact a worldwide global tax, you know, 2% a year, every year, forever. And then, like, if you want to drive around in your gas guzzler Hellcat in 50 years, you can. It's going to cost you like $500 a gallon, but you can. We should have the freedom to do anything, but we have to make it make sense financially and environmentally. So just best way to fix global warming is to just add a 2% tax on fossil fuels year over year forever, and people are just going to make their own fuel. They'll find a way. So anyway, this was my TED Talk. I was hoping to make a, educational, little interesting video, but this has turned into a half-hour slugfest. So if you're still with me, thank you so much for listening. I'm gonna have a lot more interesting things coming. So another thing is, I live in the city, so I don't have a garage. I can't tinker with the engineering and the experiments. And I also, I'm working full time, so I don't really have the money either. So if you want to, donate, support me, and maybe in the future, I can like start a cult that can like fix the world or something, let me know. I'll post the payment methods if you want to have positive change for everybody in the future. Anyway, thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye.